The first thing I need to say is I am Colombian, of course, and I'm very, very happy to be here presenting. Thanks to you, Norvegia, and José Aldemar for inviting me, and the people from the Doctorado Interuniversitario for inviting me here to present today. And yes, as Norvegia has said, I do linguistic ethnography. I work with narrative inquiry. And what I will be presenting today is the product of our research in which I've been working, a couple of research projects funded by the Spanish Ministry of Education. This was the first one that was about the appropriation of English as a global language in Catalan secondary schools. It was a comparison between two regions in Spain. I will be presenting the context later. But these two are very interesting contexts, one in Catalonia, Barcelona, more precisely, and the other one was Castilla-La Mancha, officially monolingual region. So it was a comparison between a bilingual and a monolingual region. And the second part, which was, we focused on families who, I was part of the Catalan team, who educate their children in English, even though the language of the region is Catalan and they are bilinguals. So we were these two projects where the paper that I will be presenting today was created or was originated. The data are coming from these two projects. So basically, I just want to focus on this will be my agenda today. I want to present the contextual background for this, the aims, the theory. I will be engaging with two concepts, two notions that come from youth studies and from the anthropology of future. I will be discussing them later. Then I will introduce the fieldwork, and I want to engage with some examples. I have prepared 3, but it depends on time, but let's see how much we can discuss about these interesting examples. And then I will present some notes for conclusions. And at the end, I hope we can have Q&A session in which I'd like to hear your views. So yeah, this is basically what I want to present today. So what is this presentation is about the orientations towards the future, what counts as future in the biographies of young multilingual Catalans. I want to explore how these school leavers were looking and were presenting their future aspirations and what these aspirations told us about current and contemporary issues in Spain. And I will explain these later, why all this. And finally, I wanted to explore some theories, interdisciplinary areas, not necessarily things coming from applied linguistics, even though, as I will present later, the future has been a topic in applied linguistics, but from a different perspective. So I want to engage with this interdisciplinary approach to what counts as future and how and what it informs. So my themes today will be, I want to focus on the main context, which is I want to explain why English in Spain. And this is something in which my colleague Eva Cudó from la Universidad Autónoma of Barcelona and I have been working for years. And it's trying to understand and following Park's ideas about the Korean context, what we have called the English fever in Spain. Perhaps some of you might know that in Spain a few years ago, English was not something that was very popular. It was not a subject that was really popular. Today, we find a lot of multilinguals who engage with English. But when I came to Spain to live in Spain in 2000. And at that time, it was really rare to find people who engaged in a conversation or wanted to learn English. The popular foreign language there at that time was French. And it has to do with certain contextual issues that I will explain later. So suddenly in the 2010s, 2000s, there started a boom of English, and I will explain the reasons. Then, as I said before, a couple of theoretical notions that I will be presenting. And then the ethnographic fieldwork that my colleagues and I in Catalonia, we conducted in that multilingual school located in metropolitan Barcelona. And then the three projects that I will be discussing to then present some final reflections. Okay, let's start by what we call the Spanish or the Catalan case. What is interesting about this, and what it tells us about not necessarily Spain. Spain is just a case study, but I think this applies to different contexts where English is not the main language, where English is the foreign or the second language at school. But what is interesting about this Catalan case? What makes it relevant? For those who don't know, or you might have an idea that Catalonia is a bilingual region in the north of Spain. It's located on the border with France. And Catalans have a particular history. They have been struggling for the linguistic rights, especially after a long dictatorship that banned language from public use, and I will be presenting that today. But since the late 1970s, 1980s, they started revitalizing the minoritized language. So Catalan, the language of the region, plays an important role for the definition of the national identity there. So it's interesting that Catalans have two options, linguistic options, basically, Catalan and Spanish. Spanish has always seen as the international language, is the language of the Spanish nation, even though Spain recognizes that it's a multilingual country and multinational country. But the Catalans have decided that the language of the region is Catalan. And it means that you are educated in Catalan, that and everything legal, all the legal things happen in Catalan. So that's interesting when you come as a Latin American to Catalonia, the first language ideology that you challenge, that is challenged for you, is that Spanish is not the language of the whole nation. You need to learn Catalan if you want to engage, for example, in academia, in Catalonia, in Barcelona, and the other cities, Tarragona, Girona, and Lleida, for example. So this is an interesting thing, and it has historical reasons that I will explain briefly in this timeline. So, and just thinking and considering the decisions that the people in Catalonia have made and are making. So as I explained before, Catalan was banned from the public and official uses between 1939 and 1976, which was the period in which they were under Franco's dictatorship. So it meant that Spanish was imposed, and this is the way in which Catalan speakers feel today. So it created a division between public and private spheres. So Catalonia was reserved only for the private space, for the private domains. So it meant that between the transition, between 1978 officially, this is the official transition, 1978, 1982 to democracy, there started a very strong movement in favor of the revitalization of Catalan language. It's called as la normalización lingüística. And normalización meant that Catalan should or needed to be the language for everyday life, everyday in public and private life. So that's what it was it meant. So that entailed, for example, that the education system have the mission to support this revitalization. So people started to be educated in Catalan, and Spanish was one of the subjects at school. That was everything was in according to the language policies at that time. And it was really successful. It was really, really successful. I have marked 1982 with a question mark because today, with all the processes of memory that are ongoing processes about historical memory, in Spain, people, especially with the recent 10 years, the last 10 years, sorry. In Catalonia, there has been a strong movement, independentist movement. So people are questioning this transition. People believe that this transition was something that was negotiated from above, and ordinary people didn't participate. It was the elites. It was a project of the elites. And we can discuss these things, how today this recent past is still haunting what happens in Catalonia. So it's interesting to think that this struggle about language is not about language. It's about national identity, and it's about how you feel. If you feel Spanish, if you feel Catalan, and what it means. This is an important point for us, and in order to understand the data that I will be analyzing. However, between in the 80s, during a socialist government, Spain started a transition into what it has been called an Europeization. So they started to recognize the fact that they were part of Europe, and they became part of what is called today the European Union. It was in 1985 and officially since 1986. So they are part of it, and it opened a set of possibilities for Spanish people at that time. As European members, they could travel abroad. They saw that they have the same the rights to move freely, movement, and there started an interest in other languages. For example, but of course, French was always there. But this is interesting what happened in this short period. And then all the democracy was consolidated during the 80s and 90s, when education became a right for everyone. Public education was supported, and compulsory education was expanded until the age of 16. This is something that happened around the world. It's not the Spanish case, but it's interesting to think how all these processes happened in Colombia as well, and the whole Latin America. So what happens when suddenly education is compulsory, and students can be there until the age of 16? Who wants to be part of that? Who doesn't want to? And how this affects, for example, the lives of teachers and the lives of schools there. How these changes were very important for Spain at that time. It was a process of modernization. Spain was isolated from the rest of Europe until more or less the end of the 70s because of the dictatorship. So all this represented, as I said before, an opportunity for Spanish people to start constructing this identity, European identity. And this is very interesting. So it's in these 1990s, that English started to become the preferred foreign language. But it was a really slow process. It's interesting that Spanish people, even today, believe that they have some sort of rejection towards English. People, I will present some examples of how people think about English as something that is not for them. And it's interesting to think why Spanish people refuse to learn English, and they believe they are not good learners. This is something that still is there in their imagination, even though these new generations, as I said before, engage much more with English than their parents, for example. Then it's between 1996 and 2006 that we see what Eva and I called this English fever. And it coincided with that economic boom that happened between more or less 1996 and 2006, the so-called economic boom. And then people started traveling abroad. More people from other regions in Europe started to come to live in Spain. The south of Spain is inhabited now by people coming from the so-called expats, people from the UK or people from Germany. And it's interesting, all these things that happened there. So this English fever was really this reaction. People started to be interested in learning English. And it's there when we find the initial projects on CLIL. People wanted to engage with programs similar to what we call CLIL now, or EMI programs. At the university, it started around 2004. And so we can think how new generations started to understand that English was part of their lives. And it's a very interesting thing. And we can see how, we can think of how this is changing in terms of orientations, young people's orientations, but also dispositions regarding learning other languages than Spanish. Unfortunately, and it was something that happened everywhere, the economic boom of 2008 represented perhaps the first crash in the system, and that economic boom ended there. So we had a first group of Spanish migrants, but Spanish migrants who went to other places in Europe. So it's interesting to think how English became a very important skill, and that supported this English fever. English started being seen as a skill, important skill, in order to gain some mobility, going to live abroad and try to find a future outside the country, a country that didn't offer any opportunities anymore for the young people. So this period is what we call the brain drain. So this is important because the voices that we will be examining today, they are aware of this economic crash, even though we conducted this fieldwork 10 years later, 10, 12 years later. This economic crash was a very important turning point in the lives of the parents of this generation, and in consequence for these children, it was something that was in their minds. These things might happen, and Spain is not, the Spanish government is not doing us anything to support young people. Then in Catalonia, we saw that as an overcome is something that is connected to this economic crash and what happened there. So the Catalans again started to demand, the call for their independence. Perhaps you remember that in 2017 there was a referendum, and so people were in jail, and it was very difficult. It was a hard moment for Catalonia at that time. But it had to do with this history, recent past, that hasn't been really addressed properly. And this is how Catalans feel about. This is something that we can discuss later. How they are really unhappy as being part of a Spanish state that they believe is not being fair with them. Catalonia is a really rich region. I am sure some of you have been there. You've seen how rich how interesting region is. It's really full of culture and interesting things. So they believe that they deserve much more than what the Spanish government gives them as part of this economic distribution that they have there. So we had a first crash in 2008, and this, of course, came the second crash, the pandemic, that it's something that I didn't explore in this data, of course, because we collected it before, but it's interesting how this is connected to some of the things that the kids, when we interviewed them and we spent time with them, the things that they thought about the future in Spain. So that's what I've decided to put that indicate that this is a generation that is between two crises: the economic crisis of 2008 and the another economic and social crisis as an outcome of the pandemic. So this is more or less something to give you an overview of why this Catalan case is interesting. One is the linguistic choice there, the decision of course, Catalan as the language of the nation, reproducing the ideology in a way that one nation is defined by one language. But unfortunately, when in this case it's two, but some people don't recognize it in that way. So this is just to go back to these language policies that emerged at the end of the 90s and were very popular at the beginning of the 2000s, in which CLIL, EMI, bilingual and international schools were really important, and there was a proliferation of these programs. There was a boom, and this is what Eva and I call this English fever. So some of these students, as I will present, are part of this generation of what we call a CLIL generation. These students who engage with English in a differently from their parents' biographies. This is the way in which this English boom emerged. For example, if you take a look at any newspaper and publicity there, and you can see how in each neighborhood there's a lot of English academies. The Academia de Lenguas in all neighborhoods play an important role, offering English as an extra activity, as an extra school activity. And this is something that it's very interesting. All the students that we interviewed, some of them or most of them have attended an language academy. And it's interesting that they feel they don't learn much, but this is something that people normally do. I know this is the same in Colombia, but it's interesting the role of these academies and when they create in people's imagination, what people are looking for, and how they offer their services. It's very interesting. You can see Aprende Inglés con 30 minutos al día. I mean, things that we know as language teachers that it's impossible to learn in different ways. Today, kids engage with Duolingo and some other apps, and they have other ways. But it's interesting to see how publicity uses these things. No, así es como se aprende inglés en Madrid. How? Having fun, enjoying. It's interesting, all these images that they are circulating there. No importa dónde estás, estudia inglés gratis con nosotros. We know that nothing is for free, so it's interesting to see all these resources that they draw on. These are more things. 5 juegos para aprender inglés más. So is this English fevers to show you this anxiety in Spanish society to learn English. So English is so important today. Academia de Inglés en Madrid. Do you speak English? 7 métodos para aprender inglés fácil sin salir de casa. So we can see that there's a very, very important for them. La importancia de aprender inglés desde el colegio, desde que somos niños. So we can see all these language ideologies around language learning that are being there and that circulate in publicity and that indicate some of these concerns in this Spanish society. And it's all is related to the fact that the Spanish people believe that because they don't do it in the international exams, that there is a Spanish gene in which people cannot learn English. So this is interesting. You can find a lot of people doing comedy about that on YouTube and how they talk about these things. Just to give you an idea of how reluctant people were when I came to Spain about English, is that when I came to Spain 20 years ago, a bit more than 20 years ago, there was no original version. You used to go to the cinema and all the movies were with dubbing. I mean, they have even professional actors that were the voices of famous actors. And there were actors who their careers being the voice of Marlon Brando, so it was very interesting. Also, you might, for example, have heard that in Spain, people try to castellanizar English, no? So even the names, the names of popular groups are said in Spanish. U2, for example, it's U2. And this kind of things it was very interesting when I was there, and because in Colombia we are more used to perhaps to try to, or we are more, we had more exposure to original version and all these things. You are, this is kind of these are the kind of dispositions that perhaps we develop. So it was interesting to see a whole society where people of my age, they don't like to go to see the movies in original version. We always had to go to see cinemas where there was this doblaje, it's a popular thing, el doblaje there. So it's just to give you an idea of how reluctant people were. So it's in 2018 where when in Catalonia in particular, these CLIL and EMI schemes became really consolidated. And it was through this plurilingual framework, this was the language policy of 2018, in which they recognized that Catalan was the language of education, that Spanish was also an important language, but for the first time, English became one of the ambitions of the system in that policy. And this is the way in which they framed it. In an increasingly complex world where society is rapidly changing, proficiency in several languages for communication, academic and professional uses is not only necessary, but almost indispensable. Thus, the educational system must train plurilingual speakers with different competences in different languages, able to interact in a complex linguistic and cultural context, open to the world and able to successfully access the labor market. However, when you read the whole policy, plurilingualism really, and the international languages, when they refer basically, the main reference is English. This is how they consider this framework for plurilingualism. So it's the recognition that they are multilinguals, but that they need to engage with foreign languages in this way, which means really foreign languages means really English. So it was framed as a way to improve quality of education, to foster lifelong learning strategies, to improve students' communicative and linguistic competence, while strengthening, of course, the central role of Catalan. And that's how they call this special plurilingual education, is the Catalan style of plurilingual education. So it was supported by a set of resources, economic resources. So the local government, Catalan government, started to invest in schools. And what they did is that they wanted to engage not necessarily middle-class people who had perhaps more access to these academies, language academies, but also to try to make some state schools as laboratories for this plurilingual framework. That's why they created a program called JEP, and that I will explain later, because the school that we studied was one of these schools. schools in which the Catalan government invested for offering the 50% of classes in English. For example, as we will see, some other subjects were taught in English. I'm referring to, for example, PE, but also science, history, and sometimes maths. And they had the ambition to make this part of the compulsory education. And it was basically to promote the learning of a second foreign language, which was basically English. And this is a really important moment of this framework, and where Catalan and where English became one of the languages, official and important languages at school. So that was the ambition. It does this plurilingual project, by encouraging the mastery of the Catalan language by all the students as a tool for cohesion, identity, and coexistence in our society, and the mastery of the Spanish language co-official in Catalonia. Both languages as instruments to act the more immediate academic, sociopolitics, and work environments. Likewise, it does it by supporting the mastery of other languages, mainly English, as tools of learning and entrepreneurship through the course of a lifetime, and for the acquisition of a professional training of quality. So you can imagine that this is what made that English was being seen as as a commodity, and people starting to see that this English fever in this education system was a marker of the neoliberalization of the education system. This is what the analysis of this policy brought up. And we can see it in how they frame this idea of lifelong learning, autonomy, and all these markers of neoliberalization that have been studied widely by Monica Heller or by Bonnie Occhioli or even Deborah Cameron, people that I imagine you might know. So this is perhaps a very important point for us. So how English in a way is a marker for this neoliberalization of the system. And we will see how the students that we studied in this for this paper, for this presentation, started to engage and navigate these structures, these structural issues offered by the local government and then promoted by and fostered by their school, right? So this context is very important for me. I know it's a bit complex, and if you have questions, it'll be interesting that you can tell me at the end, and we can, I think things will make sense when we will be analyzing the data. But so far, this is an important thing for us, and for me at least, that you understand all these changes over the last 20 or even 10 years, and how these political issues are important, and that, again, that in Catalonia, things about language are not about language, are about a sociopolitical positioning there, and also as a way to be in the world, as we will discuss that perhaps later. It's important, yeah. So yeah, language is a proxy for some other things, as we can discuss later. So what is the theory? I've been working for some time in narrative inquiry. This is one of the things that I am interested in. And suddenly, when you engage with other areas, you discover that people in sociology and in anthropology are looking into the same things, even though they don't pay attention to language. But it's interesting how they approach these things. So that's why I engage with two notions: the notion of life project, as envisioned by the sociology of youth, and future by the anthropology of future, as I will explain. So what are projects? Projects are drafts for a desirable future, a future which clearly will never become reality in the way it was planned. but it's the project, this project therefore has to be constantly adapted to changing circumstances or abandoned in favor of a new one. So this idea of project allowed me to understand how people understand their lives. And people like Beck, some sociologists like Beck, like Giddens, have seen how these new groups of people, we can call them generations, we engage in life through projects. So we are continually engaged in projects. Our transitions in life seems to be projects for our life. So I think I thought this idea was very interesting to explore with. I like to explore this idea of projects with leavers, not necessarily school leavers. I have also explored with university leavers. So it's when people need to make important decisions, how they envision their project, what is the draft, what is this desirable future that they are imagining and perhaps planning. So it was interesting when we talk about projects. What is future? What is future, and how we can capture future? I know this is another question that it was interesting for me. So in applied linguistics, future has been addressed mostly by colleagues who work on second language acquisition, and through models of motivation, like I'm sure you are familiar with I call him Dornay's. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation. Dornay's motivational self-system, and all the variants of this model across years, and how he developed this idea of a self, ideal self, and all these things. And after that, Norton's theory of investment, which brought a social part to that, and she allows us to think that motivation is not necessarily something that is a cognitive thing, but it's also something that is social, and that perhaps it's situated. And it's important for the identity that we create as language learners. I don't know if you are familiar with these two frameworks, but it's interesting to think how they both have seen a future there. With Dornay's and this motivation, our colleagues who work on motivation, they mostly understand it as a cognitive thing, and they try to capture it through surveys. And even though they recognize that we change and motivation is not static, but still people use surveys to capture this. So it's something that I felt, I think we need more of a social side to understand future and how we engage with future in our life. And with Norton's theory, I really like what she presented, but still investment is something, her ideas have been criticized in a way, because investment doesn't necessarily recognize that everything is situated socially. So the social class, for example, plays an important role for the kind of investment that I can make or not. So there's a lot of structural things, constraints, which perhaps prevent my agencies not well exercised, because there are structural issues that stop me, that prevent me from acting in the world. So that's what I found, that in the idea of future as future orientations, as has been understood in the anthropology of future, as the way in which Brian and Knight presented, I thought it was an interesting thing to pay attention to future. So for them, the imagined future, it means is what we anticipate, what we dream of, long for, acts as a way to legitimate the present, but also to radically shake our understandings of the past and to remake our identity in the present. So what I like from this is the idea that it's a temporal. In the present, we conjugate. There's the present. In the present, we live the future, but also we engage with our past in different ways. And I found it really fascinating to think about that. Is how we. It seems that it's in our present that we live our future. We are continually anticipating. We are continually planning. We are also hoping for things. So that's why they focus on the study of future orientations, how we construct these future our orientations in, and in particular in my case in storytelling. Of course, they are ethnographers and they look into these things in different pieces of data. But for the particular case of my presentation today, I will focus on some narratives and some of the things that I could reconstruct from my observation of these people in the site, as I will present there. So for them, future orientations, anticipation, planning, expectations, they lend texture to our experience of the now and how we prepare the groundwork for the future in the present. They provide a sense of thickness or porosity to the threshold between present and future, holding the future at an indeterminate distance. And this quote speaks to me in various ways, because one of the interesting things that I collected I have been collecting for years is how these young people know how to deal with uncertainty. Perhaps the biographies of our parents were biographies that were more safe in a way. My parents, for example, they were both civil servants, and they had a work for life. They never thought of moving around abroad to go and look for a job. So they had less uncertainties than us, for example. But these new generations, they have even more uncertainties than us. And it's interesting how they cope with them. That's what I believe this quote is very important and very interesting. So in a way, is what Brian and I say, that future orientations shape our present actions and give meaning to our past experience. This is how we have all the temporalities at the same time. But yeah, I'm saying that this is what was interesting for me about this notion, how we can capture this uncertainty and how young people navigate this uncertainty through in their stories, in their biographies, right? Okay, so we can discuss all these things at the end. So the fieldwork, who these people were and why we engaged with them. We conducted our research in 2000. It was between in 2018. This data, we have collected some other data, but what I will be presenting today is from that time. And it was a school that we called the Pins School, located in the outskirts of Barcelona. I was in metropolitan Barcelona. It was a low middle class school located in a low middle class city. And this is important because we will see that these parents were most of these families were in a way working class families, and some of them were just working not on necessarily very professional environments. But the kids had, you will see how these kids talk about their environment. This is what is important. But perhaps the most important thing about this school is that this school was one of those that participated in this new plurilingual framework as part of one of the initiatives that was called the HEP, the groups that engage in these CLIL activities. And this school was one of the first ones in doing that. So it's a state school located in a low middle class area. But they showed some sort of ambition in a way. So they hired teachers who could speak English, and they started organizing activities in English, subjects in English, delivering classes in English. The first one was PE. So it was like a testing thing. It was something that they wanted to test. And then when the plurilingual framework came with ELHEP, that was the scheme to which they applied and they had support from the state, they could organize classes of history and science in English as well. And this is what we could observe, some of these classes, some of these, and how the teachers, this was one of the first articles that my colleague Eva and I wrote about, which was how these teachers, how CLIL and embarking in English, content teachers embarking in teaching in English, how this changed their lives and how they affected their lives. So then this is what we, now in this presentation, I am dealing with the voices of the kids, the students. But it was interesting how the presence of English in this way in this school changed the life of everyone. And perhaps that's the most important thing. So for the purpose, today's purpose, I will be presenting I come from data of three of 6 group interviews that I conducted with students who were in the last year, this year 4. ESO is what in Colombia perhaps we call year 9, noveno, which is the end of compulsory education in Spain. So it's when students are 16, that's the end. Of course, those who want to go to the university, they stay longer, but leavers, some other students decide that they want to go on, just embark in the labor market. So I will be presenting the voices of students who were academically engaged and students who were not academically engaged. What is interesting for us is to see how these students aligned or misaligned or disaligned with the structures that the school was proposing for them, which was to teach them in English some of the key subjects. So for that reason, I want to focus on these were my analytical tools, the things that we will be looking today very briefly. Some narrative positioning, some of in the interviews, collected in interviews, the subjectivities that they construct in their life projects, orientations, dispositions, but also the idea of a small story is very important, as you will see, how they are able to tell stories in the future about these imagined selves and imagined subjectivities, and they are important to inform the current or the future orientations. So these were my questions very broadly. What are the future of orientations that emerge in the life projects of this group of students? What do these projects tell us about the structures that these young people are navigating and the ways in which they are navigating them? For example, this policy of teaching in English key subjects such as history and science, for example, which is something that the school is proposing for them. Not all of them align with this. Not all of them accept that. And what is the role of English in all these processes, and for them, of course, in their own biographies. This is perhaps what matters to us. So I identified three kind of life projects. One life project that I call the academic project, which is, of course, is related to those who want to go to the university, people that we can perhaps identify subjectivities that display more ambition, perhaps, and display more risk in their lives. But there are also students who construct traditional life projects, and traditional in the sense that they prefer to have or to feel that they will embark in a safer project in their lives. They don't want to risk much. So some of them, for example, discussed that they wanted to be soldiers, to work in the military, in the what I call the uniform project, being policemen or policewomen, and being soldiers, something that to give them a kind of security in their lives, no, yeah, something that they could see as safe for them. So they didn't want to take much risk. And this is very interesting because this traditional project, it was interesting because a group of students aligned with what the school proposed to them about English, and some others didn't. So it's I don't want to generalize because it's difficult to do so. But those who embark in these academic projects, of course, they show more alignments with English, of course, as you will see. But not all those who engage with these traditional life projects, those who construct these traditional projects, engage necessarily with the idea or disengage with English. And I think that's an interesting thing to discuss. So this is something that shows us all the complexities in this interesting context. So, as an example of the academic project, we interviewed a group of people. Normally I want to talk about the methodology I use. Of course, I use ethnography. I normally go there. I have chats with the teachers, with the students. I observe classes. Sometimes I participate in some activities there. Sometimes I propose activities and work with the people who are there in order to engage, to establish different relations with them, different kind of relationships with them. And it's interesting. We normally manage to get a lot of information by doing things with them. Of course, this is what ethnography does. But in order to organize the interviews, we didn't want to just organize a traditional interview. We wanted to organize some sort of ethnographic interviews, but we normally work with groups of friends. In my experience, when you conduct group interviews in a very spontaneous way, you gain access to the knowledge that circulates amongst these groups, circles of friends, which is important, but also how they perceive or how they experience the same events. And this is important because that allows us to contrast different points of views regarding one particular situation. And so this is what you will see in these interviews that I will be discussing. So this was the only, perhaps the first group that I collected about that engaged in this academic project. And these are nicknames: Selma, Eduard, and Mateus. They all are academically orientated students. It means that I go to the mainstream classroom in the Catalan school. In this Catalan school, students are separated by academic achievements. So some people go to the mainstream classes, and some others go to classes in which are special, are addressed for students who have some difficulties with content, or perhaps with Catalan as well. If they don't speak enough Catalan, so they are supported in different ways. So this academic project, they all are from the mainstream lessons. They all go to the classes in English that the school offers, in science, in PE, in technology that I forgot to mention. And perhaps all of them follow American YouTubers, and for all of them present English as something that is English as a very important thing for their future. In particular, Selma is very interesting because she produces she produced a do-it-yourself biography that the others didn't. And this is an example of how her colleagues see her as a very committed student, and she's really embarked into academia. She has attended language academies since she was a child, and she's preparing at the moment of this interview. She was preparing herself to present one of the tests in English. I think it was one of the intermediate tests in English. So she's very a good what we could call a good student. So we can see here how she presents and constructs these future orientations. But this is given that and it's everything, the programming, and it's all in English. Well, it's not that hard. And I think it's practice that we do it in English, because if you think about it, it's about the future. The word you'll find, you need to have a good level of English, because the world is globalized now and everything is in English. So I reckon that getting started on it by taking subjects in English will be like getting more into what the future will be. So you see, as necessary for the world of work, right? That this is what my colleague Eva asked her, and she replied yes. And what would you like to study? And she replies, science, physics. I don't know if you can see it. Science and physics and astrophysics, I think is what she says. So what is interesting about this project and how she constructs herself? It's interesting how at the very beginning she engages with all the tropes about English that circulate in this environment, and perhaps that circulate in Colombia as well. The idea that English is important for everything, that English is part of the future, that English opens doors. So it's interesting, all this awareness of and how English has this has been placed in this way, has been positioned in this way. But what is interesting is how Selma starts anticipating what the future will be for her. No, and this is how future orientations work here well, and how she's showing some dispositions. As I said before, she's preparing herself for this exam because she wants to have the certificate before finishing school. And we will see that this all is related to her life project, to the project that she is anticipating for her, or planning and expecting for her, right? So we see it, physics. For example, how she is aware that if she wants to study physics, what she will need is not any kind of English, but a good level of English. And she is preparing for that. She's equipping herself. So in that sense, we see how she is displaying this do-it-yourself biography. She's equipping herself and preparing herself, anticipating her brilliant future. And here how she continues engaging in her own aspirations. When Eva asked her about in another country, and she says yes, no, she would like to go to London or Denmark, and yes, so she's sure she wants to go. This is an important thing because her classmates don't necessarily engage with this idea of going abroad, but it's the idea of how English is a resource for mobility. It's something that she's making relevant in this example. I'm really sorry, Norbella, please let me know how, in terms of time, because I am a bit concerned and I don't know how long.
It's 5:35, so you have some time to finish, like maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
5, 10, perhaps. Okay, let's try to. Okay, so I will just present another biography, and it's
No,
fine.
no, that's okay, Adriana, because we can have like 15 minutes for questions, so you
Okay.
can have 10 minutes is fine. Yeah,
10,
10 minutes.
fantastic. No, perhaps I will do it. Yeah. So, okay, so this is how Selma are very academically engaged, but if you can see that her classmates don't necessarily don't engage in the same way. But perhaps this is the key thing about this first project. What is interesting for me is these two traditional biographies that also emerged and that were produced by the students, but for a different group of students. Students who are not necessarily academically orientated. We call them Mickey, Eric, and Uriol. And they were not from the mainstream class, and they didn't attend any of the English lessons that the school offered, science, technology. And this is very interesting about the biographies that they are displaying. They are from the flexible group, non-academic orientated. Mickey wants to be a mechanic. Eric wanted to express he wanted to be a police officer at that time, and Uriol, he wanted to work on marketing and music production. An important thing, and perhaps we won't have time to go into that example, is that even though these students are not good in English at school, they use English in their everyday life because they all have networks. They work, for example, they engage in gaming, and they practice them. So I have an example in which one of them explains to me how they engage. So it's interesting how they differentiate between the English that is taught at school and the English that in which they use in their spare time. And that was very interesting. But they produce what Baker calls a normal project, a project that is more traditional and less risky in a way. So here Eric, yeah. Sorry, this is the army project. Yeah. So I asked them, for that feature, what would you like? Do you think English is important or not? They all say, oh yes, it's very important. So this is how small stories work. Very interestingly here, how Mickey says, well, because for example, I asked him to illustrate his views. Well, because for example, if I want to be a soldier, well, basically I need to learn English, because if, for example, they send me to another country, English is spoken nearly everywhere, and it's better for me to learn English now. So then, to have a skill for this is my work, to have a skill for the CV. This is why I engage with what he was saying to me. And Eric says, well, policeman, if you have any issue with two foreigners, yeah, I need to know how to speak otherwise. And he said at the end, at least a little of English. So it's interesting for me how they construct this imagined self in the future and being a soldier through this small story and the other small story about being a policeman. So it's interesting that this group, even though they are not academically orientated and they don't attend the English lessons, extra additional English lessons at school, they see themselves, they see English, they align with the project of the school, with the school project about English in their lives, right? So this is a very interesting thing. While there are others who are not academically orientated and they don't engage with that project, they completely misalign or disalign from that project. And they are also from a flexible group. And even though they use English for socialization in WhatsApp and other things, they definitely don't see English important for their lives. And this is very interesting when we think about Monica Heller's and Bonnie McElhinney's ideas about the cracks in the system. And they are a good example of it. To be honest, I was very pleased when I saw this. It was very interesting to see that. So I was asking them, Okay, well, very interesting. The teachers have told us that apart from the English class, some of you take optional subjects in English. For example, some years ago, you went PE. Do you attend any of this? And one of the kids says no, never. No, no, and no, and Neil says no. To me, an optional in English, well, like I don't really trust it. I will fail it. Well, I'm going to take it. If I'm not gonna take it, I mean, I'll take something I know I'll do it. I'll do well, and I'll try to pass them. So these voices were the only ones who were against the idea of being taught this key, important, or what is considered by a school important subjects such as science or history in English. So they definitely say, no, we don't need English in our lives. For example, he continued. This is his very interesting small story at the end, when he starts telling me, sorry, it's here. This is at the end of this one. When he starts telling me that he is not interested in English because what he will need in his future is Catalan. He wants to be a police officer, so he went to a police station, and he informed. This is how his decisions are informed by his experience. So at the end, you can see. Well, I found out at the police station. I went to the police, and they told me, not in English. I had to study Catalan more. It's more important. And I asked him, and what else apart from Catalan? And he said, it depends. I mean, it's like there's no training course to be a police officer, right? I asked him he mentioned some tests. And until you're 18, I don't think you can start to do them, but you can do training cycles to study more. And then the more you study, the greater your chances of advancing positions. So I asked him, and what courses would you like to do in the meantime? I don't know yet. I think I will do sports. I see. So this is interesting how Neil positions completely differently from the rest, but he was not the only one. It was all this group. And again, English is part of the life, but not necessarily important for the future. And it's interesting their decisions in this particular case. It's Catalan and sports what they need. So this is part of these traditional biographies in a way. And this is how I interpreted there. No, he's perhaps trying to reproduce their parents' biographies, not to be safe in a place and to be local, not necessarily considering going abroad like the rest of his classmates, right? This is very briefly about how they all, this is just a closing idea of all of them have the idea that English at school is not the same as English for fun, as I said before. And the interesting thing is how they rationalize this. They rationalize how English at school is about conjugating verbs, memorizing verbs. So it's for them, it's something that in some cases they compare it to maths. It's like learning maths. So for them, it doesn't have any meaning. So I thought this was a very interesting finding. When I saw that, I thought that was very, very interesting. And this is how, for example, one of them, how they are this kind of generation who are very independent and autonomous. So, and how, for example, Victor, in this particular case, he's another low achiever. He's not a really academic orientated student, but it's interesting how he reports in this story, how when he doesn't understand his teacher, he just goes to the internet and he finds how to make things, how to understand tenses, verbal tenses, and all the things that they can understand at school. So that's this is part of these do-it-yourself biographies that were part of these subjectivities that are being created here. So these are just notes for the conclusions. So I was just looking into how English is part of the life project or not, as you could see, of a group of students, some of them academically orientated, some others not necessarily academic orientated. It's interesting that I could challenge some ideas that about the idea that those who are academically orientated are those who engage with English, not necessarily. Even those who are not academically orientated, they engage with English, but in a different way. I definitely see, and I could identify that this group of young people engage with or have a different relationship with English from the previous generation, their parents, who, of course, they didn't have streaming, they didn't have other resources that these students they have now. So they are used to, for example, to see original version and these kind of things, different dispositions from those of their parents. How all of them engage with this, or sorry, not engage, but differentiate, rationalize that English at school is not really perhaps for real. This is something that we as language teachers, we know. But it's interesting how still after all many years, I can remember the first time I heard about the communicative language teaching, and still after 30 years, perhaps 35 years, still these things are there. So it's interesting how our ideas of communication in the classroom are not what matter to education systems, but how assessment is more on, again, conjugations and the things that we all suffer. I imagine those who learn English as a second or foreign language at school. So these students are still, I could understand perfectly well what they were mentioning, because that was my experience as well, no? Memorizing these lists of verbs and things like that. And for me, methodologically, definitely an approach to narrative inquiry and ethnographic, combined with ethnographic issues, was really important for me to understand their stories, their life projects, not necessarily gather in one interview, but during the field work, the 3 months that I was there, and could see them interacting with other people and discussing the same issues over and over. No, in Catalonia, it's interesting because languages are always a topic of conversation. It's something that it's there. So just a closing remark: despite the perceived importance of English for present and future success, young students' social positioning tends to be influenced by their experiences of English language education, social conditions, and aspirations. So if you want to know more, I just want to suggest, these are the articles that the first one is the one I produced with my colleague Eva Kudo about language teachers' conditions, working conditions. And then most of the ideas that I presented today are in this article, this chapter from the book Global CLIL, edited by Eva, and that I co-produced with my colleague David Poveda, English and the Life Projects of Youth in Contemporary Spain. And there we made a comparison between some of these life projects in Catalonia and in Castilla-La Mancha, an official monolingual region. We know it's not for real, but on paper they are monolinguals, and how they deal with English as well. So this is all for now, and I'll be happy to discuss things, engage in conversations with you. So thank you very much.